don't just want to use get, but you actually want to navigate, you can also do driver.navigate. And the navigate method with our WebDriver gives us the ability to use the navigation fields of our browser. So we can use back and forth. So here we can do navigate to, we can go back, we can go forward, let's see, forward, back, we can navigate to. So you have the three different options. So you can actually do what get does by doing to. If you want to use the history, you can go back or forward. That's just another way to navigate. All right, now once we have the page open, we actually want to do something with it. Let's go back over here and open up the browser. Let's go back to Walmart. So say we wanted to test our little input box here, or search box, and we wanted to test for PlayStation. So if I wanted to actually type in, oops, I didn't need to click that. So if we wanted to simulate a click inside of this input field and simulate a person typing in PlayStation, and then simulating an enter key, we'd have to locate this web element first. So in your browsers, depending upon if you're in Chrome or Firefox, how you look up your window is slightly different. But if you go to, I love this, every time they come out with a new update, things move around. There we are. So if you're on Mac, you go to View, Developer, you want to view source. Now, if you're in Windows, the F12 key typically will open up the window for you. Or Walmart.com. Now we'll go and inspect. There we go. So this brings up the development console. And in here, you can inspect the individual fields that you want to interact with. You can also click this little arrow key icon in the development tools here. If you click that, it turns blue. And then you can hover over your page and you'll see all the different web elements get highlighted. So we'll go to this guy here. And once you left click, it will take you to the individual element that you wanted to go to. Let me hide this piece down here. We don't care about that right now. So in the Elements tab here, this contains all the source code that's on the page, but it allows you to navigate to certain individual elements. And so here we have an HTML element input. It's of type text, so it's an input field. Now it's got a whole bunch of gobbledygook here. So we have CSS information here for class. It's got some additional labeling behind the scenes here, possibly for some bootstrap or some type of display tool or language that they're using for the page. We have AutoCap, autocomplete, so this could even possibly be jQuery or a bootstrap field. Let's see, we have autocorrect, placeholder. Here's name. So we have a name identifier. So this is a form field. So when we click submit or click the search field, it will pass the name or pass the text in for the name query. So it would be query value or name value. Do we have an ID? We do not. So there's different things here that we could search for. If I copy this, copy this element and go into our code. So if we wanted to interact with this field, we have a couple of different options. So we would use the by class, and we will call this, this is item search locator. I like naming things very descriptive. I basically comment by name is my typical means of coding these days. So we'll do by locator, so we'll do by, and we are going to look it up by a couple different ways. So here we can do by class name. And if we did by class name, we would have to pick out which one of these class names we could use. So if we actually copy that, if we go back over to our browser, inside of our Elements tab here, if we actually do Control F, we bring up a little search bar here where we can search by string, we can use CSS selector text, or we can use the XPath code to actually configure or look up our tags. So we can start by pasting in the class information. You see here we get 1 of 1, which is what we want to look for. Let's see, we have class H_A, A_B. So we have a couple of different style sheets in here, but let's just start with the first one and kind of whittle our way through it to see if we can determine if we can get 1 of 1 with that. No, that one doesn't work. Let's try the next one. That one did work. Okay, so if we use A8_B, that will give us this one element, so we can identify it this way. So if we go back to our code, we can look it up as this. So this guy will return us one web element. So let's see, we don't need class anymore, so we'll take that out. Let's see, we have name of query, so we can look for name. But just to be 100% sure, let's come back in here and type in query. Now, query is going to give us a bunch of different things, but what we're looking for is we're looking to make sure that query is only applied to one name or ID. So we got name, date query, query selector. Okay, query's unique to our input field here. So we'll go back over. So the next way we can look up is doing, so we could take this again, but instead of class name, we do by name. Query. Let's see, we could do a couple other ways as well. So if we go back over to our code or to our browser, okay, let's see, we have query. We could, oh, there is an ID. So we have an ID here, global search input. If we copy that, you should only have one. Now, this is also a good way to test if your page is broken because you're not supposed to have multiple IDs on a page. It should always be unique. So this is a good way to test for that. Okay, so that came back as unique, so we can use that one. So we could also search for this one. And this time we'll do by ID. Now, say we didn't have a name field, we didn't have, so if we didn't have a name, we didn't have a link, we didn't have text, we could actually look up by XPath or CSS selector. So if I do it this way, so if I do dot, we can do by CSS selector, or we could do by XPath. Now, these are the two most powerful ways you can actually find web elements on a page. And when you're dealing with more abstract or more complicated websites, especially those that do not follow typical coding standards or naming conventions, in part if you're using like Bootstrap or a lot of JavaScript libraries that are kind of custom built where you don't have control over the ID of the labels or the fields, then you need to kind of get a little creative as to how you actually go about finding your input fields that are on your page. And to do that, you could use XPath, which starts out with either the absolute or relative path. So if you want to actually walk through your whole page from the top, you would start with the relative path of /, which starts you at the HTML. Then you could go down to the head. Then you could go down into the style. So you just kind of walk the path. So we're walking the path from the top. which is great, but yet we want to deal with this field, and it may be way down in the middle of our code. Well, for here, what we can do is we can actually use the relative path. So we could do / input. Well, that gives us all our input tags, but that's still not going to give us the one that we want. It's giving us all 7 input fields that are on the page. Now we can click through till we find the one we want, which is this guy. And then we have to actually add some additional filter criteria. So if you want to actually pull from any of the attributes that are in this tag, you would use the identifier. And then you could put in like class, you could put in ID, you could even put in placeholder. So here if we did placeholder, and we want placeholder equal to searchwalmart.com. And as you can see, we have 1 to 1. So we could use this to pull in our web element as well. So this would go inside of the XPath. Now CSS is slightly different than XPath, and it's cleaner, but it can also get ugly as well. So what's nice about CSS is, say we want to look up by class, instead of us having to actually use the class here, and instead of being able to do equal, you could shortcut here. So we want A8B, A8_B. If you see here, this does not return us this tag because this lookup is looking for the explicit text that is inside of class. Now, if we're doing it as a CSS selector, we could simply do our tag input, and we can do dot, telling you, hey, we want to look for a class, and then all we have to do is just put in the text. So this is a very cleaner way of looking up our information. So we could do it by that, we could do it by ID. So if you use pound, you're saying, hey, I want by ID. And in our case here, the ID is global search input. So input pound. So that's another way to do it. Now, if you want to actually navigate or walk into the path with CSS selectors instead of relative and absolute, you use greater than. And from there, you can walk into the nested tags underneath that. But here, this guy doesn't have one, so let's go up to this guy here. And let's start with him. So we now have this div. So we do div. So here's our tags. We have our ID, but we want to walk into this guy to actually get our input field. He is inside of, oh, he's inside of this form. So we'll take the form. There we go. All right, so we have the form. And if you follow the line underneath form, that basically tells you that all of the tags here on the right are all nested inside of the form tag here. So we want to walk into our path here. So if we do form greater than, and we do input, we're going to get 2 input fields. So the first one is going to be the global search icon, or cat ID. And then the second one is the one we want. So we actually want this guy here. But what you can do is you can then walk the path and then get the specific child inside of this input here. All right, so we'll do it the other way. We'll just keep it simple. We will do the ID. Let's go back over. So what we can do here is we can do input pound here, or input pound global search input. Now, you don't necessarily need to do this for one web element lookup. I'm just walking through the different ways you can actually pull these in. So here's an example using the style class, name, ID, CSS selector for XPath. Okay, any questions on these?